Is the brand new LUMIX S1Rii Mark II worth $1,000 more than the S5iiX? Hopefully by the end of this video, I can help answer that question for you guys. If you're making that purchase decision, should you save $1,000 more and get the features and specs that the brand new S1Rii Mark II has, or is the S5iiX good enough? And a huge thank you to today's sponsor, Storyblocks, but more on them later. Diving into the price, the LUMIX S5iiX brand new at launch was $2,200. Currently right now as I'm recording, you can pick up that camera for around $1,900, and then the S1Rii Mark II brand new right now is $3,300, so roughly $1,100 more than the original launch. So apart from price, let's dive into the physical build. So starting on the front, there is a one function button on both these cameras. There is a slightly bigger grip on the S1Rii Mark II. It also does have a front record button and a front tally light, which is really helpful when you want to know when you're recording. You can see that front tally light on top of your camera. Now on the back side of the cameras, there's a couple more differences. The biggest one being the tilt-free angle screen. Now this allows you to tilt up, tilt down, tilt out, and pivot your screen in a bunch of different ways, which is extremely useful for photographers and especially videographers. There is also a tally light on the back so you can know when you're recording from there as well. And then there is a dedicated lock switch, which is extremely helpful for when you accidentally bump that dial on the back. Now the viewfinder definitely is a big change. I would say this is probably more comfortable for people who aren't wearing glasses because it's able to fit around the eye a little bit better. Personally speaking, I still prefer the S5iiX because I do wear glasses. Then on the left side where all the camera parts are, biggest difference here is going to be that the HDMI and USB-C switch positions on the S1Rii Mark II, and that there's individual covers for every single port, which is actually really nice. If you don't want to use your USB-C and you're just using your HDMI, you're not revealing two ports, which allows potentially dust and different things to get into that port, especially when you're not using it when you are filming or taking photos. So on the right side, there is an unlock switch for the media. Meanwhile, it's just a kind of a push and release for the S5iiX. And on the S1Rii Mark II, because they're definitely heavier file sizes, which we'll get into the video specs in a bit, you do have a CF Express Type B card and an SD card. Meanwhile, on the S5iiX, it is gonna be 2 SD card slots. Now on the top of the camera, the left dials are basically about the same. There is a lock dial on both of the dials, which is really nice. So if you don't want to switch your modes on your drive settings for your photography, or you don't want to switch going from manual mode and switching over to aperture priority and things like that, there's a lock switch so you don't accidentally switch your modes. Then there is the dedicated photo, video, and S&Q switch, which to me is a huge win for the S1Rii Mark II, because personally speaking, it kind of makes the camera feel like it's either a photo camera or it's a video camera with that switch. It's kind of making it feel like two different cameras, being able to switch that mode. And you have 5 custom modes that you're able to save on your video modes, your S&Q, and also your photo modes, which is also really nice. Now, the last thing to touch point on the physical difference is that it does use the exact same battery that all the face detect LUMIX cameras use. So that's definitely a huge win no matter which way you are going. Now, there is going to be, for that sensor, you do have a 44.3 megapixel sensor on the S1Rii Mark II and a 24.2 megapixel sensor. So you are definitely going to be getting higher quality photos and images out of the S1Rii Mark II, but that makes sense because it is a resolution camera and it costs $1,000 more. Now, I personally am not going to be diving too much about the photo differences between these cameras, personally speaking, because I'm not a photographer. At the end of the day, I am a videographer and a filmmaker first. So let's dive into some of the video specs. The first thing with the S1Rii Mark II is you do have RAW recording internally into this camera, which does shoot Apple ProRes RAW. Now, ProRes is truly internal on this camera, and there's also no crop modes, which there's still a like 1.1x crop when you go to 48 or 60 frames or 120 frames a second in 4K. But in comparison to the S5 iiX, which is an APS-C or Super 35 1.5x crop, it's not as bad. On top of that, you do also have 8K video shooting, which looks really, really good, and then 6.4K open gate. Now I've heard potential firmware coming soon that's going to allow 8.1 and 7.2 open gate as well in the S1R Mark II. Now it is worth noting, I did just discover this recently, if you are running HDMI externally to a monitor when you are shooting 8K, you do, however, lose human subject detection, and it's just standard autofocus. So you do lose that subject detection when you are in 8K. Then lastly, there is 4K 120 frames a second. But what's really, really important to know about all of these video specs in general for the LUMIX S1R Mark II is all of these are going to be downsampled images from 8K. So 6.4K, all your 4Ks are downsampled 8K images, meaning that it's going to provide a much sharper, cleaner image at the end of the day. Now on the S5 iiX, there is crop modes in 4K 60 frames a second, and 48 frames a second, which is going to be that Super 35 or APS-C, the 1.5x crop. And it's also still worth mentioning, there's still no face detect autofocus in 4K 48 and 60 frames a second as of right now. Meanwhile, you still have face detect autofocus all the way up to 60 frames a second. And then once it goes to 100 or 120 frames a second, it goes back to contrast-based autofocus. So there is that. Coming soon to this channel, I do plan on doing a proper overheating test, because from my performance shooting in open gate 6.4K, I've been getting the overheating symbol how I normally film around that 15-minute mark, which is crazy. Hopefully that could probably get fixed with firmware. You can definitely turn on fan settings to improve those speeds. But with all that said, I'm able to still shoot 6K open gate on the S5 iiX and have never experienced any overheating. And I filmed over, 2 hours before on that camera. So worth noting, around that 15-minute mark at 6.4K open gate on the S1R Mark II, I have had the overheating symbol get turned on. I haven't done a proper test to see how long it goes for, but that is just worth noting. Now, before diving into image quality, here's a quick message from our sponsor, Storyblocks. With Storyblocks, you can get unlimited downloads of diverse, high-quality media for one predictable subscription price, meaning you aren't paying extra. For myself, adding stock footage onto my videos for my clients who might not have the highest budget to go out and film additional shoots. Like in this video, all the transitions, titles, and motion graphics are from Storyblocks. This actually streamlines the whole process from start to finish for your video. Just simply drag and drop those transitions, titles, motion graphics, stock footage, music. Literally, Storyblocks has it all. So if you're interested for unlimited downloads at one set price, head over to storyblocks.com/MatthewDangyou or click that link in below. Anyways, thank you to Storyblocks for sponsoring this video. Now, the image quality. To my surprise, when I was doing a proper color test with my mate, Asriel, it was a pretty shocking results, the difference between these cameras. Now, on the S1R Mark II, for the most part, it was pretty extremely accurate in terms of color. This is actually what you're watching right now, but it's just more stylized to my personal taste. But with just the standard Vlog 709 color profile, making sure that we expose your skins properly, the S1R Mark II, from what I noticed, all you really need to do was shift down the reds, shift up the magentas, and down on the blues, and it was basically extremely color accurate, and everything else was spot on. Meanwhile, on the S5 iiX, the red, blue, and yellows all need to be shifted down, and then the magenta cyan had to be shifted up, and then the one color that was spot on was green for the S5 iiX. So overall, you're going to be getting a more natural looking image out of the S1R Mark II straight out of camera. But at the end of the day, color is extremely subjective, and you can get really good looking images on either of these cameras. With that said though, you do still get that cine-like A2 color profile on the S1R Mark II, which is really nice for if you're just getting into color grading. Now, personally speaking for myself, I do prefer the S1R Mark II image overall over the S5iiX. It is definitely still a sharper, more contrasty, but it feels more natural, more warm to the overall image, and just more and more accurate on this camera over the S5iiX. With that said, my personal S5iiX is almost 2 years old at this point, so that could affect the color too, potentially, at the end of the day. Then for stabilization, the LUMIX S1Rii Mark II definitely just takes the cake. It has 8 stops versus 5 stops, and there's a whole new stabilization mode called cropless mode, which basically de-warps the edges when you are on wide angle lenses, and hopefully that technology just improves over time. Now for autofocus, the LUMIX S5iiX is really good, and the S1Rii Mark II is also really good. One thing they did improve though on the S1Rii Mark II, as you notice my hand going up, blocking my face, blocking my eyes, it is still locked on to my head even when I'm moving around. It's not until it fully covers my face it goes onto my hand, but it can also figure out, seeing my head and seeing my screen, it's figuring out where my eye is. And it's not, you know, blocking my eye. Right now on the S5iiX, this would jump to my hands and rapidly change. It's just locked in on my eyes right now, which is really important for having pupil detection over just having the face and head detection. Now, the low light performance is definitely more of an interesting one. I did this test with the S5iiX, all of this on base ISO at 640, 200, and 400, 640 on the S5iiX, 200 with dynamic range extension off, and then 400 with dynamic range extension on. The images out of all these cameras look really good. Now, I boosted all of them to the dual native ISO and exposed properly for all of these images. What I noticed though, when I started pushing the S1Rii Mark II dual native ISO higher than what it normally is, if at 1000 or 2000, the image still genuinely looked as clean, if not cleaner, than the S5iiX at the higher ranges like 4000. Even though the dual native ISO on the S5iiX is 4000 and on the S1Rii Mark II, depending on your color profile and if you have dynamic range extension on, you're either at 1000 or 2000 in Vlog. So with all that said, if you are expecting the S5iiX to have way better low light performance than the S1Rii Mark II because of having the higher megapixel sensor, well, that's just really not the case. The S1Rii Mark II still packs a punch in low light, even though it has a higher megapixel sensor, meaning you shouldn't worry if you are a wedding filmmaker whatsoever, or you just need to shoot in low light. You'll still get really high quality low light settings. So let's dive into some of the advantages for the S5iiX and then some advantages for the S1Rii Mark II. The two biggest ones overall for the S5iiX, the first one being obviously the price. It's a lot cheaper, and if you were willing to put that $1,000 into lenses, you're gonna get a lot more lenses and a lot more versatility out of the S5iiX at the end of the day by saving that $1,000. The second advantage that the S5iiX can potentially be the low light performance, but in all honesty, in my testing, it seemed very similar. The S1Rii Mark II advantages are a lot more, and it should be because of the $1,000 difference. The video specs are just a lot more. You get a lot more specs out of this camera from 8K, you're getting 6.4K, 4K 120. Granted, all of this is way sharper images, so subjectively speaking, you might want to diffuse these images if you want to take off that digital sharpness. So the S5iiX could have an advantage for having more softer images in comparison to the S1Rii Mark II. Now, should you buy the S1Rii Mark II or the S5iiX? I'm gonna put this in two different categories on who I recommend what camera. So if you are buying your first camera or you just are new to L mount as a whole, I would say get the S5 iiX. It's way plenty good enough for your first camera or just getting started into L mount, plus saving that $1,000 again for buying lenses, camera cages, potentially lights, audios would be definitely a huge benefit instead of just spending $1,000 more just on a camera body and still needing lenses, camera cages, and lights and audio and all of that stuff. Now, should you upgrade to the S1R Mark II from the S5 II or 2X? Yes and no. Maybe is gonna be the answer. So yes, you should upgrade to the S1R Mark II if you really feel like the S5 iiX is holding you personally back and you just want those upgraded specs, you love the body design, then sure, by all means, get the S1R Mark II. You're gonna love it. And the S5 iiX or S5 II will still be a great B cam to the S1R Mark II. Also, if you just want improved photo capabilities, having a 44 megapixel sensor, the high res photos, having Capture One capabilities on the S1 Mark II can definitely be a huge benefit to photographers with this camera. Now, no, I would say if you've been watching this in 2025 and you're waiting for a certain camera, because there's still 2 other flagship cameras from Lumix that hopefully are coming someday, and you're willing to wait 1 to maybe 2 more years for those cameras, then I would say the S5 iiX is plenty of good enough, and you could save that money, buy other gear, buy lenses, buy all this other equipment, and save that money for the next 1-2 years. I don't know when those cameras are coming out, but I would say just hold on. There's probably still something even greater because this is only the photo camera from Lumix, the photo flagship camera. There's still definitely supposed to be other flagship cameras that are hopefully coming down the line. And I would personally say wait if you're willing to wait another 1 to 2 years for those cameras. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you are interested in seeing why the S5 iiX does feel brand new to me in 2025, check out that video right there. YouTube recommends you might like this video right here. Until next one, guys, peace.